Welcome to another episode of Food, Nutrition, and Wellness with Dr. Dan Remley. Today, we're going to be talking about meal preparation and saving money. So stay tuned. Welcome to another episode of Food, Nutrition, and Wellness with Dr. Dan Remley. Dan, it's always a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks for having me on.
And it's my understanding that you're going to help us save lots of money and prepare really good food.
Yeah, it's all about planning and planning your meals out by week, by the week and by the month so that you can be very economical when you go to the grocery store, and you're not going to make a lot of impulse purchases and spend a lot of money on food that you really don't need.
Well, Dan, when my wife and I go to the grocery store, she goes and gets all the really good food, and I get the food that I like to snack on.
Right. Right. And grocery stores are really good at making you buy food that you don't really need, like those impulse items. And they're always they have marketing gimmicks and tricks to really get you to buy those types of foods. And for example, like you always see the chips and the candy bars at the checkout lines, or right in front of the aisles. And those grocery stores, they do a lot of research. They do a lot of consumer research that demonstrates how consumers behave at the grocery store, and so they can nudge those types of foods. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But this is a really important area because I don't know if you've been to the grocery store recently, but prices are really starting to go up.
Very much so. Even during the pandemic, we noticed that many of our staple items that we do purchase have increased 10, 15, 20%.
Yeah, more people were eating at home, and so demand has gone up. But also there's a lot of disruptions in trade and the food chain. As you know, we've had the meat company there had a virus that's like a ransomware virus, and so the whole the meat manufacturer and the slaughterhouse, they were all shut down, and so for a day or two, and so there are disruptions. Also, we have a big drought in California too, and there's some climate change issues going around the world. So we have some disruptions that way, and it's very complex. But food prices are going up. They have gone up, and experts expect that they're going to go up even more. So
let's take a look at your PowerPoint.
All right. So we're going to talk about my plate, and I know I've talked about this before. My plate sort of represents a healthy plate, but it also is sort of representative of the types of foods that we should be eating every day. And it gets into portion sizes too. We'll talk about setting up a food budget. It could be a weekly or it could be a monthly, but that's also critical to saving money at the grocery store. And then certainly reading labels, and then different ways that we can reduce food waste, because I don't know if you knew this, but about 40% of all the food that's consumed in America goes to waste. And so I don't know if you're like me, but a lot of our food goes to waste. We buy too much that we don't end up using. And I do compost, so I'm able to compost some foods, but we end up throwing a lot of food waste away. There's a lot of hungry people in America, and and also food that goes to landfills really creates a lot of problems too. It produces methane gas, which is can lead as a contributor to climate change and that type of thing. So it's good that we don't waste food, not only for ethical reasons, but also for environmental reasons as well.
Well, our refrigerator makes it convenient for us to waste food. Many times we have leftovers, and what usually happens is those leftovers gets pushed back until they're out of sight.
Right. Yeah. And so we can freeze leftovers. That's one strategy. And then, reheat them at the next, when we're getting low on food. So there's different ways to think about leftovers, but leftovers are important strategy for, you're right. Refrigerators can be a good thing and a bad thing too, because they allow us to have leftovers and use leftovers. But if we shove them to the back, as you said, then they become food waste. So this is the My Plate model, and this represents a healthy plate. And there's a couple things that I want to point out with this. This represents the Dietary Guidelines, which is kind of the USDA, the government's recommendations for healthy eating. And about half the plate is recommended to be fruits and vegetables. So if you think about your groceries cart, really half of the foods that we have in our grocery cart really should be fruits and vegetables. Their fruits and vegetables are loaded. They're very nutrient dense. They're high in vitamins like vitamin A and C, and fiber, which is also really healthy for us as well. So we should have lots of fruits and vegetables in our diets. Now, fruits and vegetables, I'm talking about unprocessed fruits and vegetables. So potato chips could technically be a vegetable, right? So rather see people eat the actual potato than the potato chips. Then there's grains and there's proteins too. And so with proteins and grains, you want to think about portion sizes as well. So the recommendations for most adults for meats is about 6 ounces a day, and 3 ounces is about the size of a deck of cards. And so that's not a whole lot of meat. And so when we think about our plates, we want to think about portion sizes, and the same with the grains too. And grains include things like cereal and rices and breads. And then dairy is an important food group too, because dairy has calcium, which we need for our bones. And so these types of food groups should populate our plates. And then also, if you think about your grocery cart too, are these food groups represented in our grocery carts?
Dan, when you say protein, what do you mean by that? What kind of food items are there?
Yeah, so we're talking about meats and poultry and fish, but also things like nuts and beans, those types of things. And actually beans, like dry beans, kidney beans, those types of beans can actually be considered legumes. They can be considered a vegetable or a protein. So when you're planning your meals out, you want to think about these food groups and how to incorporate as many of the food groups in your meals. And the same goes for shopping. So with meal planning, you want to make sure that you have a budget for either a monthly budget or a weekly budget, depending on how often you go to the grocery store. Some people go every week. I go about every other week. I go probably twice a month. We do about 2 shops a month. So, if you have a monthly budget, food budget, then you can, divide that by 4, and that gives you an idea of maybe, how much you should spend per week on food. Some people will include like eating out into their food budgets. Other people keep that as a separate budget item. So I kind of recommend keeping that separate. But also when you go to the grocery store, you should have a budget for non-food items like toilet paper and laundry detergent, things like that are non-food related. But the less often we go to the grocery store, the better, because what happens, like we were talking about earlier, when you go to the grocery store, you get sucked into buying impulse. I can't even count the number of times that I walked into a grocery store saying I only need milk and bread, and I wind up walking out with donuts and candy and chips and things like that. So they always get you. You always see something. Oh, I can just get this or that. It looks really good. Another trick, when you go to the grocery store, you should not go on an empty stomach, because when you go on an empty stomach, you're more likely to succumb to those impulse purchases. And when you're thinking about a meal plan, if you shop with a grocery list, you're less likely to deviate. You're less likely to buy foods that you really don't need. But when you're creating that list for your grocery list, you need to think about, what's in your pantry currently. What do your family members really like? Because why buy food that people aren't going to like? So you want to take that as a consideration. But do stick with that grocery list. Recipes are nice. I mean, I typically, for the week, every time I go grocery shopping, I have 2 or 3 recipes I'm going to try. And so I'll look at those ingredients and see what I have, and then see what I need, and put those on my list, those food items that I need. But then, there's also, there's meals that I know my family likes, that spaghetti. I don't really need a recipe. And so, I'll put the ingredients for the spaghetti on the list. So The grocery list can be made up of things that your family likes. It can be, you might be trying new recipes, but do consider, what you have in your pantry versus what you need. And you can also construct your grocery list based on coupons that you have. So with coupons too, you want to make sure they're foods that you need, though. That's the thing with coupons. They always kind of get you to buy foods that you wouldn't normally buy. So use those coupons for foods that you already need on your grocery list. But you can really kind of build, or another strategy, you can build your whole, your meal plan, your shopping list around those coupons. Another strategy too is buy what's on sale or in season. So right now in the summertime, there's lots of different fruits and vegetables that that might come on sale. So think about those sales and take advantage of those sales. And a lot of times they are seasonal. You want to consider lunch, breakfast, dinner, in terms of your shopping list. As I said, what your family likes. How to use leftovers. So, maybe you have a couple days a week where you're just going to eat leftovers. So think about when you're preparing foods, if you're going to have a casserole or something like that, how much will you actually eat? How much of it will you save and have as leftovers? Create your shopping list. Some people have a shopping list on their phones. So that seems to work for some people. Other people, I always seem to write it on like an envelope or something like that. But shopping lists are important. Keep it handy. You can shop once a week or once a month, depending on how often you can get to the grocery store. There are some areas, even in this county, where people live pretty far from the grocery store. I remember in Missouri, we lived about 40 miles from the nearest full service grocery store. So we would probably go once a month, and that would really influence what we bought too. We buy fresh, but we buy a lot of frozen and refrigerated food, canned food that you can keep on hand for a while. As I said, make sure you're not hungry when you go to the grocery store. Shop alone, because if you have young kids can influence what you buy, and food companies know this, and so they do a lot of marketing research, and they know, especially when you get to the yogurt aisle and the cereal aisle, they strategically place the kid-friendly products in those, so the kids see them and and pester their parents to buy those products. And there's a good reason why the candy aisle is at the very end of the checkout lane, and the candy aisle typically is at comes up to my waist, but it's at kid eye level. So those food companies know these, know your kids, and if you have kids, and know how they might influence you. So it's better to shop alone. Stick to your list. Try to avoid buying those impulse purchases. And try to stick to one grocery store if you can. But I'll go to Aldi's, and I'll go to Kroger's for some things. Sometimes you have to be flexible. If you can't find one thing, sometimes I bring my phone, and so if I can't find a vegetable that I need for a recipe, I can substitute it for something else. The store brands are always going to be a little bit cheaper, and their store brands are the generic brands. Sometimes they're made at the same manufacturing plant as the brand names. So the store brands are always going to be a little cheaper. The foods at the very bottom of the shelf or the very top of the shelf might be cheaper too. The name brand, the more expensive items are going to be at eye level, and that's another marketing gimmick that the food companies might use. Bring along your coupons. Price comparisons, you can compare by the ounce, for example, or by the pound, and make economical decisions that way. And there's also price scanners at the store too, so you can make use of those. Now I'll talk a little bit about food waste. And a lot of people don't really understand food labels, use by, sell by dates. These are only guides for quality or freshness, but they're not really guides for food safety. So with most produce items, most perishables, you pay attention to the use by, sell by, but if it's within a week after the use by, sell by date, you're going to be okay. You're not going to be, it's not going to be unsafe. Even go beyond that, certain food items. Milk probably, I mean, milk can be easily spoiled. And so with milk, you typically want to consume most of it by the use by, sell by date. I mean, you can wait a little bit longer to consume it, but again, use your senses, smell, taste, just to make sure that's not spoiled. But as a general rule, there's like a 1 week grace period. The exception is baby formula. Baby formula, you have to go by the sell by date. That's like, it's that becomes a food safety issue. So that's the only time you have to pay attention to food labels in terms of the food safety. But otherwise, these are just guides for quality and freshness of the product.
One of the things that I found in our refrigerator are the door compartments where we have different condiments. And I know that we have several condiments that are way past the sell by dates. And it's very easy because, you get a big thing of mustard and you only use it once a month.
Yeah. Well, a lot of other products are very acidic, meaning they don't spoil very easily. So I'm thinking like salad dressings and even like mustards, ketchup. That ketchup has a little bit of vinegar in it, so they're very acidic products. And usually you can keep them for a long time, for months, and they won't go rancid or bad. So most of the time, especially in a refrigerator, most of the time those really acidic products you can keep for. Even salsas too. Salsas usually have some vinegar, even lemon juices and things like that. So yeah, those I know what you mean though. They can go bad though if you keep them around too long. As I said, with milk and eggs, you do want to pay a little bit more attention to the use by, sell by dates, because they can go they can spoil a little bit more quickly. With meats, people tend to plan their meals around meats. And with meats, if you're not going to use them, within a few days of when you take them home, you could put them in the freezer. I will say too, they can stay in the freezer for months, really, if they're wrapped well, that type of thing. But with freezing, when you take them out to thaw, you want to make sure that you thaw them correctly. So you don't want to put them on your counter. You want to put them in the microwave. You can thaw them in the microwave if you're going to cook them right away, or you can put them in the refrigerator, take them out, a few days before you're going to prepare them. You can put them under 7-degree running water. So that's another way that you can thaw meats as well.
Can you refreeze meat that has been thawed out?
It's not recommended that you do that. Canned products can, you can keep those on the shelf for months as well, and they're not going to really go bad. There's some really good recipe resources if you're that we often refer in our extension nutrition classes. These are some resources that you can go to find really healthy recipes. I mean, there's recipes everywhere. You can go online and look for recipes, but these are some good resources for recipes. There's some of these you can just type in the ingredients, and there's one called USDA mixing bowl. And with mixing bowl, you type in what ingredients you have on hand, and it'll churn out a recipe. And there's also apps like that too, which can be really helpful. So maybe you have some potatoes, maybe you have some leftover carrots or something like that. You want to think about you want a recipe, and so you type those ingredients in, and they'll maybe give you a soup recipe or something like that.
Dan, how does how do you feel about a lot of the processed frozen foods? like you can get frozen spaghetti, frozen meatloaf sandwiches, or meatloaf
Mhm.
dinners, etc. What's your feeling about those?
Yeah, the concern with a lot of those frozen products is that they typically have more sodium in them. So if you have hypertension or you are hypertensive, if you have a history of heart disease, sometimes they have added sugar in them. So this is where you want to get into label reading. You want to look at the label on the food label and see, if it's got 20% or more sodium per serving, and that's a really high source of sodium, that product. And you'll find that a lot of your frozen, meals and boxes and pre-prepared meals and dinners and things like that, they have a lot of preservatives in them. So, read your labels. The same goes for even some frozen like vegetables. Sometimes they'll be mixed. There'll be a sauce in them. They'll be high in sodium. So you're kind of you pay for that convenience sometimes, and you pay for it in your wallet because those convenient products typically are more expensive, but also they may not be as healthy as well. These are some sources, again, some sources, resources to look at some recipes and some tips for menu planning. But I mean, the bottom line is plan ahead, come up with maybe on a calendar, you say, what you're gonna, which days you're gonna have leftovers, which day you're gonna have the spaghetti and so forth, and plan out those meals, come up with your shopping list, plan for those leftovers, freeze food if you have to freeze food, but shop, try to make it to the grocery store at least once a month. And but the more often you do go to the grocery store, probably the better chances you're going to spend more money, because it's hard to walk out of there without buying those impulse items.
My wife and I enjoy fish. When we go to the grocery store, we see both fresh fish and frozen fish. What is the best?
Well, we do need any type of fish is good for us. I think probably you pay more for the fresh than the frozen, but they're both nutritious. And I would say, the fried fish is probably the less healthy than whether it be frozen or fresh. And that goes for most foods too. I mean, whether it's fresh or it's frozen or it's canned, I mean, they're all pretty healthy choices. The exception is when you add sugar or fat or salt, to those products. And those are used as preservatives, and that's why it's important to read your labels.
Hmm.
But fresh probably tastes better too, right? Than your frozen.
Yeah,
I mean, I like
yeah,
fresh chicken is better than frozen chicken.
yeah.
Even with frozen meats, they'll add a lot of times frozen meats will have preservatives, and even some of the frozen chicken varieties there'll be brine in them to help preserve and to keep them kind of tender. So you want to make sure that if you're buying a bag of frozen meat, for example, look at the
I
label,
see.
see what the sodium content is, because all of us should be eating less preservatives, especially as we get older. We're more likely to have hypertension, which can be influenced by our sodium intake and how much sodium we consume. So generally speaking, the more convenient foods that we purchase, in other words, those foods that, we just throw in the microwave, right? You take out of a box, you throw in the microwave. A lot of times those foods will be more processed than foods that we buy fresh and we have to prepare.
And one other question? Usually when we cook things, we use some kind of oil or butter or some kind of sauce. What do you recommend? Let's start with it. Would it be better to have corn oil, vegetable oil, or what do you think?
Yeah, the oils that are liquid at room temperature are generally healthier than the oils that are solid at room temperature for our hearts and our arteries. Those oils that are solid typically have more saturated fat, and which is detrimental to our cardiovascular system. And so, yeah, look for the what we call polyunsaturated, like what you just mentioned, the vegetable oils, or in some cases, the olive oils, which we call monounsaturated. So the vegetable oils, the olive oils, and those types of oils, canola, yeah, those are healthy choices for us, healthy fat choices. But keep in mind, even though they're healthier than the saturated, they are still very calorie dense. And so they're 9 calories per gram. And so, you don't want to overdo it as well when you're cooking. But certainly if you're sauteing or stir frying, yeah, use those liquid oils as much as you can. Even on bread, if you have putting a little bit of olive oil on your bread and maybe a little Parmesan cheese, that's a healthier choice than butter.
To sort of sum this up, what are a few recommendations you can give to the listening audience?
Yeah. So when you're shopping, have a plan. Make up your shopping list. Think about your meals for the week or the month. Stick to your plan. Use coupons as much as you can. Don't shop when you're hungry, and try to limit the number of times you actually have to go to a grocery store. So planning will save you money.
We're talking with Dr. Dan Remley. He's an extension specialist with the Food, Nutrition, and Wellness Program with the Ohio State University Extension Program.